You reek of cleaning chemicals. Take your breaks away from the mansion during guest hours. Use your senses. Are your brain cells as black as your skin? Jonathan, head of staff, sneered at Lena. 3 hours later, she was still curled up under the storm, exactly where he'd sent her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's continue. Lena, drenched in the storm, shaking beneath an oak tree, 50 yards from shelter, her body trembling as she lay still on the bench. Ethan's car rolled through the gates of his $50 million estate. At that moment, Ethan Cross's eyes locked onto her. He didn't know why he was bothered. He was warm, safe, inside his climate-controlled car. "Sir, should we?" He raised his hand, silencing his driver. His eyes never left her. Why wasn't she running for cover? Something about this moment felt wrong. So wrong that Ethan couldn't look away. The answer to this question would shatter everything he thought he knew about power, wealth, and the people who worked for him. Lena was about to change Ethan Cross's life forever. Sleeping under his oak tree, this black lady trembled not from cold alone but from a weariness that went soul deep. And in that instant, watching her through rain-streaked glass, Ethan felt the first crack in the armor he'd spent a lifetime building. She wore a soaked blue uniform that clung to her frame. Her curly brown hair was plastered against her face, and even from this distance, he could see her shaking. Through the rain-blurred window, he studied the figure more closely. Something about her posture, the way she held herself so small and still, triggered a flicker of recognition. "Lena!" he muttered. The realization struck him with unexpected force. Why was his employee sitting outside in a storm when there were staff quarters just 50 yards away? She should have been inside hours ago. He'd recently put his cousin Jonathan in charge of household operations. Wasn't he supposed to make sure things like this never happened? Before we go further, if you believe that wealth means nothing without humanity, that power should protect rather than crush, and that every person deserves dignity regardless of their station, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. Ethan Cross had built his empire on control. Every decision calculated, every emotion regulated, every weakness eliminated. He'd learned early that sentiment was expensive, that caring made you vulnerable, and that the world respected only strength. Power was the currency that mattered, and he'd accumulated more of it than most men would see in 10 lifetimes. His mansion employed 37 people, but he couldn't have named 10 of them. They were functions, not humans. The chef who prepared his meals, the driver who took him to meetings, the hands that cleaned his floors while he slept. He paid them well. That was enough. That was all that should matter. He'd spent years perfecting this detachment. His father had taught him that lesson young, though perhaps not in the way the old man intended. Weakness invites exploitation. Emotion clouds judgment. Attachment creates liability. Those principles had carried Ethan from poverty to prosperity, from nobody to someone whose name alone could move markets. But the image of that woman trembling under his tree wouldn't leave his mind. "Drive forward," he told his driver, his voice James than intended. As they pulled closer into the driveway, the headlights swept across Lena's hunched form. Water pooled around her feet. Her uniform, soaked through, clung to her skin like a second layer of suffering. She still hadn't moved. Still hadn't even looked up at the approaching car. Something twisted in Ethan's chest, an unfamiliar sensation that felt almost like pain. "Sir," his driver asked, waiting for instructions. "Just stop here a moment." His driver shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Should I see if she needs help, sir?" Ethan almost said yes. Almost gave the order and let someone else handle this strange moment of awareness. But something stopped him. Something about the way she laid there, so still and resigned, as if the storm was exactly what she expected from the world. "No," he said finally. "Let's go in." They drove to the parking lot, leaving Lena behind in the rain. As Ethan stepped out under the covered entrance and walked into his temperature-controlled mansion, he couldn't shake the image burned into his mind. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Ethan lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm rage outside. Every thunderclap echoed with Lena's stillness. Every lightning flash illuminated the question burning in his chest. What kind of empire had he built if his own employees preferred a storm to his shelter? The rain hammered harder against the windows, but inside, everything was warm and dry and perfectly maintained. Exactly as it should be. Exactly as he'd designed it. So why did it suddenly feel wrong? He turned onto his side, closing his eyes, willing himself to forget, to return to the comfortable numbness that had served him so well for so long. But behind his eyelids, all he could see was a woman in blue, shaking in the rain, too afraid or too proud or too broken to seek the warmth that should have been hers by right. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would get answers. But even as he made that decision, Ethan Cross didn't yet understand what those answers would cost him. Didn't yet know that the woman trembling outside his gates would become the crack through which his entire carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. Morning came with deceptive brightness. The storm had passed, leaving the grounds of Cross Estate gleaming and fresh, as if the night's violence had never happened. Ethan stood at his study window, coffee in hand, watching the gardening staff clear fallen branches from the manicured lawn. Everything looked pristine again. Perfect. Controlled. Except he couldn't stop thinking about Lena in the rain. He'd barely slept. Every time he'd closed his eyes, he saw her hunched figure beneath that inadequate shelter, trembling in the cold while his mansion stood 50 yards away with empty rooms and warm beds. The image had burrowed under his skin, lodging somewhere uncomfortable and unfamiliar. At 9 sharp, he called his assistant. "Send Jonathan to my office." His cousin arrived 15 minutes later, looking relaxed and confident in an expensive suit that Ethan's own money had paid for. Jonathan had always carried himself with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never had to earn his position, who'd been born adjacent to wealth and assumed it was his birthright. "Morning, cousin," Jonathan said, dropping into the leather chair across from Ethan's desk without being invited to sit. "What's the emergency?" "I have a tea time at 11. Ethan set down his coffee and studied his cousin's face. "I want to ask you about something I saw last night." "Shoot." Why was one of the maids sitting outside in the storm? Lena. She was under the oak tree, soaked through, while the rain was coming down hard enough to flood the streets. Jonathan barely looked up from his phone, a smirk playing at his lips. "Oh, her." He waved dismissively, as if they were discussing a minor household inconvenience. "Lena. She's fine. Just has a flair for drama, that one. Always making a scene about something." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She was sitting in a storm, Jonathan. That's not drama. That's suffering." Jonathan finally looked up, his expression one of amused patience, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Look, I told her to take her breaks away from the main house during guest hours. It's common sense. She brings an odor from all those cleaning chemicals. Can't have that wafting through the halls when we're entertaining, can we? The Harrisons were here for dinner last week and commented on it." The words landed like stones in still water. "You told her she smells?" "I told her to be mindful of the guests' comfort," Jonathan corrected, his tone suggesting this was a completely reasonable distinction. He checked his watch, a gold Rolex that had been a gift from Ethan 2 Christmases ago. "The staff quarters are perfectly adequate. She chose to sit outside. That's on her, not me. I was protecting the family's reputation, cousin. You know how these people talk. Give them an inch, and they start getting ideas about their place. These people." The phrase hung in the air like poison. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual cruelty behind them. The easy arrogance. The complete absence of shame or self-awareness. Jonathan genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong. Worse, he believed he'd done something commendable. Ethan studied his cousin in silence, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The entitled smirk. The designer clothes paid for with money he didn't earn. The cavalier dismissal of another human being's dignity. When had Jonathan become this? Or had he always been this way, and Ethan had simply never bothered to notice? "That's all," Ethan said quietly. "You can go." Jonathan stood, relief evident on his face. "Great. So we're good. No issues." We'll talk later about your management approach." Something flickered in Jonathan's expression, a brief flash of uncertainty, but it vanished quickly. Sure. Whatever you need, cousin." He headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and if you're worried about Lena, I can have HR send her a reminder about professional conduct. Sometimes these staff members need clear boundaries reinforced." "That won't be necessary." After Jonathan left, Ethan sat in silence, staring at the closed door. His coffee had gone cold. Outside, the sun continued its cheerful assault on the morning, birds singing in the clean air, everything looking exactly as it should. But something fundamental had shifted inside him. He'd handed Jonathan authority over the household staff as a favor, a way to give his cousin purpose and income without much thought about what that meant. Jonathan was family. Family took care of family. That was the rule Ethan had always followed. But who took care of people like Lena? The question unsettled him more than it should have. He tried to return to work, pulling up reports on his computer, reviewing projections for the next quarter. The numbers blurred. His mind kept circling back to Jonathan's smirk, to his casual cruelty dressed up as efficiency. How many other small cruelties happened in his home that he never saw? How many people suffered quietly while he focused on profit margins and power plays? He'd built an empire, yes, but what kind of foundation had he built it on? By late afternoon, Ethan made a decision. "Send Lena to my study," he told his assistant. 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock at his door. "Come in." Lena entered hesitantly, head bowed, hands clasped in front of her uniform. In the daylight, he could see details he'd missed in the rain. The careful way she'd tied her hair back, the worn spots on her sleeves from repeated washing, the way she held herself so small, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Standing in his doorway, she looked even more fragile than she had under the tree. Not physically fragile, he realized, but emotionally compressed, like someone who'd learned that visibility meant vulnerability. "Please sit," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair Jonathan had occupied that morning. "I'd rather stand, sir, if that's all right." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to dirty your furniture." The comment struck him like a physical blow. "You're not going to dirty anything. Sit." She lowered herself into the chair as if it might break beneath her, perched on the very edge, ready to flee at any moment. Her hands remained folded in her lap, knuckles pale with tension. Ethan tried to find the right words, the right tone. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, faced down hostile boardrooms, commanded respect from men twice his age. But sitting across from this nervous woman in a maid's uniform, he felt suddenly inadequate. "I want to ask you about last night," he began carefully. "About why you were outside during the storm." Lena's eyes stayed fixed on her hands. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." "You're not in trouble. I just want to understand. The staff quarters are available. Why didn't you go inside?" Silence stretched between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear. "Sir Jonathan said I shouldn't eat or rest near the house, sir. He told me I make the guests uncomfortable." She swallowed hard. "That I smell like cleaning products and it's unpleasant for people. I didn't want to cause problems for you or embarrass the family, so I've been taking my breaks outside. I waited under the tree until my shift ended. I thought the rain would stop sooner." Her voice held no anger, no accusation, just a terrible quiet acceptance that pierced something deep in Ethan's chest. "He said this to you directly?" "Yes, sir. After the Harrisons' dinner party. He said I should be more aware of my place." She finally looked up, meeting his eyes for just a second before lowering her gaze again. "I don't want any trouble, Mr. Cross. I need this job. I have a son who depends on me, and jobs like this are hard to find. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'll stay outside. It's fine." It wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. Ethan sat back in his chair, feeling something he couldn't quite name expanding in his chest. Shame, maybe. Or rage. Or the uncomfortable awakening of a conscience he'd thought he'd successfully buried years ago. She had chosen a storm over his cousin's contempt. She had chosen cold and rain and humiliation because she believed that's what people like her deserved. And worse, she'd accepted it with such dignity, such grace, that it made Jonathan's cruelty seem even more monstrous by contrast. "You can go," Ethan said finally, his voice rougher than intended. "Thank you for being honest with me." Lena stood quickly, relief evident in her posture. "Thank you, sir. I promise I'll work harder. You won't have any complaints." She was already at the door when he spoke again. "Lena." She turned, hand on the doorknob. "You don't smell like anything except hard work. And there's no shame in that." Her eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across her face. Then she nodded once and slipped out of the office, closing the door softly behind her. Ethan remained in his chair long after she'd gone, staring at the space where she'd sat. The afternoon light slanted through his windows, illuminating dust motes floating in the air. Outside, he could hear the distant sounds of his estate functioning smoothly. Lawn mowers, voices, the hum of expensive machinery maintaining his expensive life. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Ethan Cross began to reflect on what he'd actually built. He'd spent his entire adult life focused on accumulation. More money, more power, more control. He'd seen it as freedom, this empire of his. Freedom from the poverty of his childhood, freedom from dependence on anyone, freedom to shape the world according to his will. But looking at it now through Lena's eyes, through the lens of her quiet suffering, he saw something else entirely. His empire wasn't freedom. It was a prison. A beautiful, luxurious prison that locked him away from anything real, anything human, anything that mattered beyond the bottom line. And he'd locked everyone else in there with him. The people who worked for him weren't functions. They were humans with lives and struggles and children who depended on them. They had names and stories and dignity that shouldn't depend on his cousin's whims or his own indifference. He'd never noticed, had never wanted to notice. Because noticing meant caring, and caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant weakness. But what was the alternative? To continue like this, blind and deaf to the suffering happening under his own roof? To let men like Jonathan define the culture of his home while he counted his money and pretended it was enough? Ethan stood and walked to the window, looking out over his grounds. Everything looked perfect from up here. Controlled. Ordered. Exactly as it should be. But underneath that perfection, in the shadows he'd never bothered to examine, people were suffering. And he was responsible. The realization settled over him like a weight, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. He didn't know yet what to do about it. Didn't know how to fix a system he'd spent years building on the principle that emotion was weakness and distance was strength. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Cross felt the urge to try. The days that followed moved with strange slowness. Ethan found himself distracted during meetings, his attention drifting from quarterly projections to the movements of his household staff. He'd never paid attention before, never noticed the rhythms and patterns of the people who kept his world running. Now he couldn't stop watching. Lena arrived every morning at 5:30. He knew because he'd started waking earlier, drawn to his office window by something he couldn't name. She would appear at the service entrance in the pre-dawn darkness, always alone, always carrying the same worn canvas bag. By the time the rest of the staff arrived at 7, she'd already completed half her duties for the day. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, efficient and invisible. Ethan began to notice the small touches he'd always taken for granted. Fresh flowers in the entry hall, windows that never showed a fingerprint, floors that gleamed without ever being wet when he walked on them. Lena's work was everywhere, and yet he'd never seen her doing it. One evening, he asked his head of security a casual question. "The staff who walk to work, how far do they come from?" The man pulled up records on his tablet. "Most live within a few miles, sir. We provide transportation stipends for those further out." He scrolled through the list. Except Lena Morrison. She declined the stipend. Lives about 4 miles east, walks both ways. 4 miles. Each way. 8 miles a day on foot. Arriving before dawn and leaving after dark. Ethan couldn't shake the image from his mind. While he sat in climate-controlled luxury, while he complained about minor inconveniences and fired people over percentage points, This woman walked 8 miles a day just to clean his floors. The realization felt like something sharp lodging in his chest. By the end of the week, his curiosity had become something more urgent. He needed to understand. Needed to see what kind of life required that level of quiet desperation. So on Friday evening, he did something he'd never done before. He followed her. Ethan waited in his car, parked discreetly down the street from the estate's service entrance. At 6:45, Lena emerged, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She looked tired, her movements slower than they'd been that morning, but she walked with purpose down the tree-lined street toward the main road. He kept his distance, following several car lengths behind as she made her way through the city. The neighborhoods changed gradually, wealth giving way to modest comfort, comfort giving way to visible decline. The streetlights grew sparser, the buildings older, the sidewalks cracked and uneven. Lena walked for nearly an hour, never stopping, never slowing. Past chain-link fences and boarded windows, past corner stores with bars on the doors, past groups of men who watched her pass with eyes that made Ethan's hands tighten on the steering wheel. Finally, she turned into a narrow alley between two tenement buildings. Ethan parked and followed on foot, his expensive shoes loud on the broken pavement. The alley opened into a courtyard surrounded by crumbling brick structures that looked like they should have been condemned decades ago. Lena climbed an external staircase to the 3rd floor and disappeared through a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Ethan stood in the courtyard, staring up at the building. The windows were mismatched, some covered with plastic sheeting, others with torn curtains. Paint peeled from the walls in great strips. A smell of rot and mildew hung in the humid evening air. This was where she came after cleaning his mansion. This was the home she walked 8 miles to reach. He moved closer to the building, drawn by a need to understand that overrode his common sense. The walls were thin enough that voices carried clearly through the cracks. He could hear a child crying, the sound high and desperate. "I'm hungry, Mama. My stomach hurts." "I know, baby. I know. Mama's going to make you something, okay? Just give me a minute." Lena's voice, soft and soothing despite the exhaustion in it. Then another voice, male and slurred. "Where's my money, Lena? I know you got paid today. Hand it over. David, please. I need to buy food for Caleb. He hasn't eaten since breakfast. The boy can wait. I need it now." Ethan moved to the window, staying in the shadows. Through the gap in the curtains, he could see into a single room that served as kitchen, living room, and bedroom all at once. The space was barely larger than his walk-in closet. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, replica of Lena, except he had darker skin compared to her brown skin. He sat at a wooden table that looked ready to collapse, tears streaming down his face as he stared up at Lena. She stood by a hot plate, trying to prepare something from nearly empty cabinets. And a man, dark-skinned, heavy-set and unsteady on his feet, loomed over her. His face was flushed, his eyes glassy. He reeked of alcohol even from outside the window. "You speak back at me?" David sneered, stepping closer. "Think cleaning rich people's toilets makes you have a say? Give me the damn money before I take it myself. Please, David. Not in front of Caleb. Don't tell me what to do in my own house." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave marks. "I said give it to me." Lena tried to pull away, her free hand instinctively moving to protect the small purse at her hip. "It's all we have until next week. If I give it to you, Caleb won't eat. That's not my problem. Maybe if you were a better wife, we wouldn't be in this situation." He raised his hand, palm open, ready to strike. Caleb screamed, "Don't hurt Mama." Ethan didn't remember making the decision to move. One moment he was watching through the window, frozen by shock and rage. The next, he was bursting through the door, wood splintering as the flimsy lock gave way. David's hand stopped mid-swing. He turned, confusion and anger mixing on his flushed face. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed David's wrist, squeezing hard enough to make the other man gasp. Up close, David smelled like cheap whiskey and old sweat. His eyes were bloodshot, unfocused, But Ethan could see awareness creeping in as he registered the quality of Ethan's clothes, the cold fury in his expression. "Touch her again," Ethan growled quietly, each word precise and deliberate, "and you'll regret breathing." David tried to pull his arm free, but Ethan's grip was iron. "This is my house. My wife. You got no right. I have every right." Ethan twisted David's wrist just enough to make him wince. "I have the right that comes from being the only thing standing between you and a prison cell right now." "Ethan, please." Lena's voice broke through his rage, shock written over her as she trembled. She'd moved to shield Caleb, who was pressed against her legs, sobbing quietly. "Please, sir. Don't call the police on my husband. Caleb is watching." The plea in her voice stopped him cold. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something worse than fear in her eyes. He saw shame. As if this, all of this, was somehow her fault. As if she deserved this life. He turned back to David, who'd gone very still in his grip. "Listen carefully. If you ever, and I mean ever, raise your hand to her again, I won't call the police. I'll handle it myself. And trust me, you don't want to know what that means." He released David's wrist with enough force to send the man stumbling backward. David caught himself against the wall, cradling his arm, his face twisted with humiliation and rage. "You can't just come in here and—" "I just did." Ethan pulled out his wallet and threw several bills on the table. "Enough to feed them for a month. That's for the door." He turned to Lena, who stood frozen, tears streaming silently down her face. "Get your things. You and Caleb are coming with me." "Sir, I can't. I can't just leave. This is my home." "This isn't a home. This is hell." Ethan's voice softened slightly as he looked at the boy clinging to his mother's legs. "And your son deserves better than hell." "But where would we go? The estate has guest quarters. Fully furnished. Safe. You'll stay there until we figure out something permanent." "I can't accept that, sir. It wouldn't be right." Ethan looked around the room again, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the bare cabinets, the single mattress in the corner that the three of them apparently shared. He looked at Caleb's tear-stained face, at the bruises forming on Lena's arm where David had grabbed her. "What's not right," he said quietly, "is this. What's not right is walking 8 miles a day to work for me, then coming back to this. What's not right is your son going hungry while I throw away more food than he'll see in a week." David made a move toward them, but Ethan's look stopped him cold. "Stay where you are." Lena's resistance crumbled. She looked at Caleb, at his hungry, frightened face, and something inside her seemed to break. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Just for tonight. Just until I figure something else out." She gathered their things quickly, stuffing clothes into a plastic bag with shaking hands. Caleb stayed pressed against her side, his eyes wide and watchful. David slumped against the wall, muttering curses but making no move to stop them, as he eyed the cash on the table. As they left, Ethan paused in the doorway, looking back at the man who'd just tried to hit his wife in front of their son. "Remember what I said. Next time, there won't be a warning." The walk back to his car felt surreal. Lena carried the plastic bag, one hand holding Caleb's small palm. The boy walked between them, silent and scared, looking up at Ethan with an expression that was half gratitude, half terror. In the car, Caleb fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from crying. Lena sat in the back seat with him, stroking his hair, staring out the window as the neighborhood shifted back from poverty to prosperity. She didn't speak, and Ethan didn't push her. But as the lights of Cross Estate came into view, he caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. She was crying again, silently, tears sliding down her cheeks in the darkness. A pang drove through his chest. He'd thought bringing her back to safety would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something far more complicated than he'd bargained for. The guest quarters sat at the far end of the estate, a small cottage originally built for visiting family that had rarely been used. Ethan unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting Lena carry the sleeping Caleb inside. The space was modest by his standards but luxurious compared to what they'd left behind. A full kitchen with gleaming appliances, a living area with soft furniture, 2 bedrooms with actual beds and clean linens. Everything was climate-controlled, well-maintained, safe. Lena stood in the doorway, still holding Caleb, looking around with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Not gratitude, exactly. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like grief. "The bedrooms are through there," he said, gesturing down the short hallway. "Bathrooms stocked with everything you should need. Kitchen too. If you need anything else, just call the main house." She nodded slowly, shifting Caleb's weight in her arms. The boy stirred but didn't wake, his small face pressed against her shoulder. "I should put him to bed," she said quietly. "Of course." Ethan waited in the living room while she disappeared down the hallway. He heard the soft sounds of her settling Caleb, her voice murmuring something soothing that he couldn't make out. When she returned, she'd shed her jacket but still looked poised to flee, standing near the door rather than sitting down. "Thank you, Mr. Cross, for what you did tonight, for bringing us here." "You don't need to thank me." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Why did you follow me, sir?" she asked, struggling to look him in the face. Ethan gulped, shaking his head. "I had a little business around there. Then I saw you. Was about to greet you when you entered, and I saw all that." Lena locked eyes with him, for the first time, as though she was searching his soul for the truth. Ethan bit his tongue hard, hoping he doesn't give anything else away. He felt exposed under her scrutiny. She nodded and looked away, and he heaved a sigh of relief. "Lena, you can't go back there. You understand that, right? What I saw tonight, that man, what he was about to do to you." "He's not always like that," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When he drinks, he gets angry. But he's not always drinking." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "That's not an excuse." "I know." She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of protection that made her look even smaller. "I know it's not. But he's still Caleb's father. He's still my husband. A piece of paper doesn't give him the right to hurt you." "I'm sorry, sir," she muttered, ending the conversation. Ethan felt a surge of frustration so intense it almost choked him. The distance in that word, "sir," felt like a wall slamming down between them. He'd just saved her, pulled her out of hell, and she was already defending the man who'd put her there. The realization twisted something painful in Ethan's chest. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice colder than he intended. "You stay here a few days until things calm down, then go right back to him? Wait for the next time he drinks, the next time he raises his hand?" "I don't know." She looked exhausted suddenly, the weight of the evening finally showing on her face. "I just know I can't make decisions like this tonight. I'm tired, sir. And Caleb needs me to be strong tomorrow." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to make her see how insane it was to even consider returning. But looking at her now, at the quiet desperation in her eyes, he realized something that made his frustration curdle into something uglier. She still loved him. Despite everything, some part of her still loved David. The thought made him feel sick. "Fine," he said, his tone clipped. He turned toward the door, needing distance, needing air, needing to not look at her standing there with that trapped expression on her face. When the door slammed shut, Lena crashed into a sofa behind her, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'd lived my life as a child without my father. It wasn't funny. I can't make Caleb go through the same thing." Ethan's walk back to the main house felt longer than it should have. The night air was cool, the grounds quiet except for the sound of his footsteps on the gravel path. Above him, stars glittered in a sky that had been storm-torn just days ago. He felt anger, yes. But underneath it, something worse. Disappointment. He'd expected her to see David for what he was and choose better. Instead, she was making excuses, clinging to the very thing that was destroying her. And that hurt in a way Ethan didn't want to examine too closely. Back in his study, he poured himself a drink he didn't really want and stood at the window, looking out toward the guest cottage. A single light burned in one of the windows. He imagined Lena sitting in there, maybe looking back at the mansion, thinking thoughts he couldn't begin to guess. His protective instincts warred with his growing frustration. Part of him wanted to march back there, to make her understand that she deserved better. That Caleb deserved better. That staying with David wasn't noble sacrifice, it was slow suicide. He growled inwardly when he recalled her bruises. Ethan finished his drink and set the glass down harder than necessary. He needed to let this go. Needed to stop caring about a woman who'd made her choice clear. He'd offered help. She'd refused it. That should be the end of it. Except it wasn't. And he knew it wouldn't be. He'd crossed a line he hadn't meant to cross. And there was no going back now. He paced study, sleepless, replaying the scene in that tenement apartment. David's hand raised to strike. Lena's instinctive flinch. Caleb's scream. The casual, practiced nature of it all, as if violence was just another part of their daily routine. And underneath those fresh images, older ones surfaced. Memories Ethan had buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself they belonged to someone else. His own father, drunk and furious, towering over his mother in their cramped kitchen. The sound of her crying behind closed doors. The way she'd wear long sleeves even in summer, makeup that never quite covered the bruises. The promises that it would get better, that he'd change, that she loved him despite everything. She'd stayed. Right up until the night his father's rage finally killed her. An accident, the police report said. A fall down the stairs during an argument. Ethan had been 12, old enough to know the truth, too young to do anything about it. He'd sworn then that he'd never be helpless again. Never be poor enough, weak enough, powerless enough to watch someone he cared about suffer while he did nothing. He'd kept that promise. Built an empire on that rage. That determination to have enough power that nothing could hurt him ever again. But Lena's hesitation, her conflicted loyalty to a man who didn't deserve it, brought it all rushing back. The helpless fury of watching someone choose their own destruction. The terrible understanding that sometimes saving people meant saving them from themselves. Still burning with fury, Ethan made a call. Marcus, his head of security, answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the hour. "Sir, I need you to handle something. Discreetly." "Of course." Ethan gave him David's address, the details he'd memorized without meaning to. "There's a man there who needs to understand the consequences of his actions. I want him scared. I want him hurt badly enough that he remembers this lesson. But I want him alive and functional. Can you do that?" A pause. "May I ask what this concerns?" "You may not," Ethan replied. "Understood." "When?" "Tonight. Before he's sober enough to cause more damage. Consider it done." Ethan ended the call and sat in the silence that followed, waiting to feel something. Satisfaction, maybe. Justice. The sense that he'd protected someone who needed protecting. Instead, he felt hollow. This wasn't protection. This was revenge. And he wasn't doing it for Lena. He was doing it for the ghost of his mother, for the 12-year-old boy who'd been too small to fight back, for every moment of powerless rage he'd ever swallowed. But he didn't call Marcus back. Didn't cancel the order. Because regardless of his motives, David deserved what was coming. And maybe, just maybe, fear would accomplish what Lena's love and loyalty could not. By dawn, he received confirmation from Marcus that the job was done. David had been found by neighbors, beaten but conscious, taken to a public hospital where he'd recover with nothing worse than bruises and a limp that would last a few weeks. No police report had been filed. According to Marcus's sources, David had told the doctors he fell down some stairs. The irony of it made Ethan sick. Ethan had freshened up, sitting in his study when he heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," he said. Lena entered carrying a tray, moving with the same careful quiet she'd always had. But something was different in her posture now. Less fearful, maybe. Or perhaps just differently afraid. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. I brought you something. You don't need to serve me anymore, Lena. You just have to take care of your son." "I know. But I wanted to." She set the tray on his desk. "You've given us so much. I needed to give something back." On the tray sat a bowl of soup, steam rising from its surface. The aroma hit him before he could see what it was, rich and complex, triggering a memory so sharp it felt like falling. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the bowl. "What is this?" "Just soup. I found the ingredients in the kitchen and thought you might like it." Ethan lifted a spoonful to his lips. The taste exploded across his tongue, exactly as he remembered it. Chicken and herbs and something else he couldn't name, a combination that shouldn't work but somehow created perfect comfort. His mother's soup. The only thing she'd made that his father had never criticized. The one meal that meant safety and warmth in a house otherwise filled with tension. But that was his mother's secret recipe. "You cooked this?" he asked, raising a brow, and she nodded. "Where did you learn to cook this?" His voice came out rougher than intended. Lena looked uncertain. "My mother taught me. Here's her photo." Lena brought out her locket with a smile, and it was her mother's picture and a white kid she carried. She was the nanny to this kid here. The room tilted slightly. Ethan's jaw dropped. "Nanny Rose?" he asked. "You know her?" Ethan set down the spoon with exaggerated care, trying to process what he was hearing. "Nanny Rose worked for my family. She taught my mother to make this soup, because it was my favorite." Lena's eyes widened. "I didn't know. She never told me the family's name, just that she'd cared for a little boy who liked her cooking." "That was you. That was me." They stared at each other across the desk, the implications settling between them like fog. Their lives had crossed decades ago, connected by a woman who'd shown Ethan more kindness in few years than his own father had in a lifetime. Rose had left when he was 7, when his father's behavior became too dangerous. He'd cried for weeks. And now her daughter stood in his study, seeking shelter from the same kind of man. The symmetry of it felt like fate. Or curse. Ethan couldn't decide which. "I loved your mother," he said quietly. "She was the only person in that house who made me feel safe. When she left, I thought I'd done something wrong. She talked about you sometimes." Lena's voice was soft with memory. Lena moved closer, her hand hovering over the back of the chair across from him as if asking permission. Ethan nodded, and she sat, her movements careful and deliberate. "Did your mother ever tell you why she left?" he asked. "She said the father was dangerous. That she couldn't stay and watch what was happening to the mother and child. It broke her heart to leave you, but she had to protect herself too. My father killed my mother when I was 12. The words came out flat, emotionless, the way he always said them on the rare occasions he spoke of it at all. During one of his rages. After that, I went to boarding school. Spent every moment since then making sure I'd never be powerless again." Lena's intake of breath was sharp. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." Ethan picked up the spoon again, staring at the soup. "But it's why I reacted the way I did. When I saw David about to hit you, I saw my father. I saw my mother. I saw everything I've spent 30 years trying to forget." Understanding dawned in Lena's eyes. "That's why you were so angry when I said I was staying with him. Your loyalty to that man, your excuses for him, it's exactly what my mother used to say. Love isn't supposed to hurt, Lena. Family isn't supposed to destroy you. I know that." Her voice cracked slightly. "Believe me, I know. But leaving isn't as simple as deciding to go. There's Caleb to think about, where we'd go, and what David might do if I try." "He won't do anything." Something in Ethan's tone made her look up sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means he's been reminded of the consequences of raising his hand to you." Ethan held her gaze, letting her see the truth in his eyes. "He showed up at the hospital this morning. Beaten badly enough to think twice before touching you again." Lena's face went pale. "You did that?" "I made sure it was done." "Yes." Her eyes bulged out. "But I asked you not to call the police." "I begged you." "I didn't call the police." His voice was cold, controlled, the voice he used in boardrooms when negotiations turned hostile. "I handled it privately. He's alive, he'll recover, and he understands now that there are people watching. People who won't tolerate what he's been doing." Lena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You had no right. He's still Caleb's father. He's still." Still what? Still the man who was going to hit you in front of your son? Still the man who spends your grocery money on whiskey while Caleb cries from hunger? Ethan stood too, his careful distance crumbling. I had every right. Someone needed to protect you since you won't protect yourself. This isn't protection, it's violence. You're no better than he is. The accusation struck harder than any physical blow could have. Ethan felt something twist in his chest, painful and sharp. I'm nothing like him. Aren't you? You both think you can solve problems with your fists. You both think you know what's best for me without asking what I want. What you want is to go back to a man who beats you. Forgive me for thinking that's not a rational choice. Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks, but her voice stayed strong. It's my choice to make. My life. My mistakes. You don't get to play hero and fix everything just because you have money and power. They stood on opposite sides of the desk, the soup cooling between them, this connection they'd discovered now feeling like another form of betrayal. Ethan wanted to yell, to make her understand that he'd done this to protect her, that he'd seen how this story ended and refused to let history repeat itself. But looking at her now, at the anger and hurt and confusion in her eyes, he realized he'd made the same mistake his father always had. He'd decided what was best for someone else without asking. He'd used violence to solve a problem that required patience and trust. He'd become the very thing he hated. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I should have asked you first. I should have respected your autonomy even if I disagreed with your choices. Lena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I need time to think. About everything. About staying here, about David, about what I want Caleb's life to look like. Take all the time you need. The cottage is yours as long as you want it. After she left, Ethan sat back down and stared at the soup, now lukewarm and unappetizing. The connection to Rose, to his childhood, to some sense of fate or purpose, had felt meaningful. Had felt like a sign that helping Lena was the right thing, the necessary thing. But maybe it wasn't about right or wrong. Maybe it was about his own unresolved trauma, his own need to rewrite a history he couldn't change. He pushed the bowl away and dropped his head into his hands. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Cross felt the full weight of his loneliness. All his wealth, all his power, and he couldn't save the one person who needed it most. Couldn't save himself from the ghosts that haunted him. Outside, the sun set over his perfect estate, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful and cold and utterly empty. 2 weeks had passed since their argument. 2 weeks of careful avoidance, of Lena keeping to the cottage and Ethan buried in his work. But the estate wasn't large enough for true distance, and eventually, their paths had to cross. It happened in the kitchen. Ethan had come down early one morning, restless and unable to focus, seeking coffee and solitude. Instead, he found Lena teaching the head chef how to adjust the seasoning on a sauce, her hands moving with quiet confidence as she explained the balance of flavors. The chef, Henri, a temperamental man who'd worked for Ethan for 5 years, listened with unexpected humility. When Lena finished, he tasted the sauce again and nodded with grudging respect. Better, he admitted. Much better. Ethan watched from the doorway, struck by how natural she looked in this space. How her presence seemed to calm the usual chaos of the morning kitchen routine. Over the following days, he noticed the staff gravitating toward her, asking questions, seeking her advice on recipes and techniques. She had a gift. Not just for cooking, but for teaching, for bringing out the best in others without making them feel small. By the end of the second week, Ethan made a decision. He found Henri in his office, reviewing the day's menu. I want to make some changes to the kitchen management structure, Ethan said without preamble. Lena will be taking over as head of culinary operations. You'll report to her. Henry's eyebrows rose, but he nodded slowly. She has the skill for it, and the respect of the staff. I have no objection. Good. We'll announce it tomorrow. But news traveled fast in a household of 37 employees. By evening, Jonathan had stormed into Ethan's study without knocking. Are you out of your mind? He demanded. You're putting a maid in charge of the kitchen? Ethan looked up from his laptop, his expression cold. I'm putting a talented chef in charge of the kitchen. Her previous job title is irrelevant. She's a black woman with no formal training, no credentials, no background in. Stop. Ethan's voice cut through the room like a blade. Finish that sentence, and you're done here. Permanently. Jonathan's face flushed. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You're making decisions based on your personal feelings, not business sense. People are talking, Ethan. They're saying you're, involved with her. Let them talk. Ethan stood, moving around his desk to face his cousin directly. Lena has more skill and integrity than half the people I employ. Her promotion is based on merit, on the fact that she's made every dish in my kitchen better in 2 weeks than Henri has in 5 years. If you have a problem with that, examine your prejudices, not my judgment. This isn't about prejudice. It's about maintaining standards, It's about you being threatened by someone who worked harder in one day than you've worked in your entire life. Ethan's voice dropped to something dangerous. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to congratulate Lena on her promotion. You're going to treat her with the respect her position deserves. And if I hear even a whisper of you undermining her authority or spreading rumors, I'll cut you off completely. No more allowance, no more access to family money, no more position in this household. Am I clear? Jonathan's jaw worked as he tried to find words. Finally, he forced out, "Crystal." Good. Now get out. After Jonathan left, Ethan stood at the window, watching the grounds darken as evening fell. He just burned a bridge with family for Lena's sake. Jonathan would never forgive the public humiliation. But Ethan found he didn't care. Some things mattered more than family loyalty. Like actual loyalty. Like merit. Like giving someone a chance to prove themselves rather than keeping them trapped in a role that wasted their potential. Like Lena. He was still standing there when his phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "Sir, we have a situation. It's about the kid." Ethan's blood went cold. What situation? Caleb was taken from school this afternoon, by David Morrison. We've been tracking him. He's at a warehouse in the industrial district. The rage that filled Ethan was instant and absolute. I'm on my way. Don't let him leave. Already surrounded, sir. Waiting on your orders. Ethan grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, but stopped when he saw Lena running down the hallway toward him, her face streaked with tears. Caleb, she gasped. The school called. David took him. When I called him, he said he'd hurt him if I called the police. I don't know what to do, I know where they are. Ethan kept his voice calm despite the fury coursing through him. My security team is already there. Caleb will be safe. I'm coming with you. Lena. He's my son. I'm coming with you. Her voice carried a fire he'd never heard, burning off any room for argument. Ethan nodded once, and they rushed for the car together. The drive took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Lena sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Ethan drove with controlled precision, breaking every speed limit but staying in complete control. Why would he do this? Lena whispered. He loves Caleb. He'd never hurt him. He's desperate. Desperate people do unthinkable things. The warehouse loomed ahead, surrounded by Ethan's security vehicles. Marcus met them at the entrance, his expression grim. He's inside. Second floor, northwest corner. The boy appears unharmed but frightened. Morrison appears possibly intoxicated, Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the screen of his laptop, showing the CCTV footage. Ethan turned to Lena. Stay here with Marcus. No. Lena, if he's drunk, he's unpredictable. He's less likely to do something stupid if I'm there. Please. I need to see that Caleb's okay. Against his better judgment, Ethan nodded. They entered the warehouse together, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Stairs led to an office area that overlooked the main floor. Through the grimy windows, Ethan could see David pacing, Caleb huddled in a corner, crying silently. The door was ajar. Ethan pushed it open slowly. David spun around, and Ethan saw immediately that Marcus had been right. The man was drunk, his movements uncoordinated, his eyes wild. But he wasn't violent. He was terrified. "Mr. Cross." David's voice shook. "You came before I called you." "Nice." Ethan's brows crossed. "How dare you?" Lena rushed in, running towards Caleb. "Baby, are you okay?" "Not so fast." David blocked her way. "You can only take him after I get my compensation." "Compensation?" Ethan's voice was ice. "I know Lena's living with you now. I know you're taking care of them. That's fine, that's good. But I'm still his father. I should get something for that. It's only fair." Caleb sobbed harder, pressing himself into the corner. Lena started toward him, but Ethan held up a hand, stopping her. "You want money for your son," Ethan said slowly. "You kidnapped him from school, terrified him, and brought him here to extort me. It's not extortion, it's just, I have debts. Gambling debts. Bad people are after me, and I thought, if you're taking care of my family anyway, maybe you could help me out too. As a favor." "A favor." Ethan moved closer, his control slipping with each word. "You traumatize your child, put him through hell, all for gambling debts?" David's face crumpled. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just needed a sure thing, something to get me out of the hole. But it kept getting deeper, and now they're threatening to kill me if I don't pay. What was I supposed to do?" "Be a father," Lena's voice rang out, sharp and clear. She moved past Ethan, walking straight up to David. "Be a man. Be anything other than this pathetic excuse for a human being." David reached for her. "Lena, baby, you have to understand." She slapped him. Hard. The sound cracked through the warehouse like a gunshot. "Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice stayed steady. "I stayed with you for years. I made excuses for you. I told myself Caleb needed his father. But you're not a father. You're a monster who uses his own child as leverage. And I'm done. We're done." David staggered back, holding his cheek. "You don't mean that. You love me. I loved who you used to be. That man died years ago. I've just been too afraid to admit it." David was speechless. He watched Lena rush to Caleb and carry him into Het arms. His eyes cracked when he finally realized he'd messed up. Big time. Q. Ethan pulled out his phone and made a call. Within minutes, his lawyer arrived with papers already drawn up. Divorce documents, custody agreements, restraining orders. "Sign them," Ethan said, placing the papers on a dusty desk. "Sign them now, or I will call the police and you will go to prison for kidnapping. Your choice." David looked at the papers, at Lena's furious face, at Caleb crying in her arms. Whatever fight had been in him drained away. He picked up the pen with shaking hands. "If you sign these and disappear," Ethan continued, his voice deadly quiet, "I'll pay off your gambling debts. All of them. Consider it payment for never seeing any of them again." "How much?" "Does it matter? Sign the papers, David, or go to prison. Those are your only options." David signed. Every page, every line, his signature growing sloppier as his hands shook harder. When he finished, Lena walked past him without a word. Ethan took the papers and handed them to his lawyer. "Get these filed immediately. And make sure his debts are settled by tomorrow." He turned to David one last time. "If you come near them again, if you call, if you even think about contacting Caleb, the deal's off and you'll face every consequence you've earned. Understand?" David nodded, defeated and broken. As they left the warehouse, Caleb safely in his mother's arms, Ethan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't like the beating he'd ordered. This was protection done right. Clean, legal, final. Lena looked at him over Caleb's head, her eyes red but clear. "Thank you," she mouthed. He nodded once. And for the first time since this whole thing began, he felt like maybe he'd actually helped rather than just inflicted his own trauma on someone else's situation. The papers would be filed. David would disappear. And Lena and Caleb would finally be free. The months that followed moved differently than any time Ethan could remember. Not with the frantic pace of business deals and power struggles, but with something gentler. Something that felt almost like healing. Lena remained in the guest cottage at first, maintaining a careful distance while the divorce was finalized and Caleb adjusted to the seismic shift in their lives. But gradually, inevitably, the walls between them began to dissolve. Started with small things. Ethan would find excuses to visit the cottage, bringing books for Caleb or asking Lena's opinion on menu changes for the main house. She would appear at his study door with coffee when he worked late, staying to talk about everything and nothing until the sky lightened with dawn. One evening, 3 months after the warehouse, Ethan found Lena in the estate's garden. She sat on a bench near the rose bushes, watching Caleb play with a soccer ball on the lawn. The boys' laughter rang out clear and bright, a sound that had been absent in those first weeks but now came easily, frequently. "He's happy," Ethan said, settling beside her. "He is." Lena smiled, but her eyes held shadows. "Sometimes I wonder if I waited too long. If I should have left David years ago, before Caleb had to see all those things. You left when you could. That's what matters." "Is it?" She turned to face him. "I made so many mistakes, sir. Stayed too long, made excuses, convinced myself that suffering was somehow noble if I did it for the right reasons. I spent 30 years building walls so high nothing could touch me," Ethan said quietly. "Convinced myself that control was the same as strength, that caring was weakness. We've all made mistakes. The question is whether we learn from them." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Caleb play until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. And Ethan realized that this quiet moment of connection, meant more to him than every triumph he'd achieved in his entire career. Somewhere along the way, without meaning to, he'd fallen in love. The realization should have terrified him. Love made one vulnerable, exposed, weak. But looking at Lena now, at the strength it had taken her to leave David, to choose herself and Caleb over the familiar pain of her marriage, Ethan saw something different. Love wasn't weakness. Love was the hardest, bravest thing a person could do. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, standing in the cottage kitchen while Lena taught Caleb how to make pasta from scratch, the craziest thought clicked in his heart. "Marry me," he said, the words tumbling out without preamble. Lena looked up from the dough she was kneading, flour dusting her hands and apron. "What? Marry me, Lena." She was stunned. Her eyes went teary. "Why? You've done enough for me. For us. You don't have to do anything more." Ethan stepped forward and took her hands, staining his with flour dust. A shiver ran up her spine as he squeezed her hand softly. "Not because you need protection or security. Not because I want to save you. But because I love you. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because Caleb deserves to see what a real partnership looks like, and I want to be part of showing him that." Caleb stopped rolling his small piece of dough and looked between them, his eyes wide. Lena pulled her hand from his grip, wiping them on a towel. "Ethan, I know it soon. I know we both have baggage and scars and reasons to be careful. But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And I don't want to waste time pretending otherwise." "Are you sure? Really sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he replied. A year dropped down her cheeks. "Yes." A smile broke across her face, radiant and real. "Yes, I'll marry you." Caleb let out a whoop and launched himself at both of them, wrapping his small arms around their legs. They stood there in a flour-dusted kitchen, the three of them holding each other, and Ethan felt something in his chest expand until it almost hurt. This was what wealth really meant. Not money or power or control, but this belonging, connection, the knowledge that you mattered to someone beyond what you could provide. They married 2 months later in a small chapel 20 miles from the estate. Lena had been firm about her vision. No grand society wedding, no elaborate reception at Cross Estate, no photographers or press or hundreds of guests who didn't really know them. Just something small and real, with the people who mattered most. "I've spent too much of my life performing for other people's expectations," she told Ethan while they planned. "This needs to be ours. Just ours." So they invited 15 people. Lena's aunt and 2 cousins who'd stood by her during the divorce. Caleb, of course, proud in his role as ring bearer. A handful of staff from the estate who'd become genuine friends. Ethan's lawyer, who'd helped secure Lena's freedom. And Marcus, whose loyalty had proven genuine over the months. Jonathan wasn't invited. He couldn't accept the fact that Ethan was marrying the same black maid he'd thrown out. Soon she would be the mistress of the house and had more say than him. The chapel was small and simple, with wooden pews and stained glass windows that cast colored light across the stone floor. Lena wore a dress she'd chosen herself, cream-colored and elegant without being ostentatious. Ethan wore a suit but no tie, feeling more relaxed than he had at any business function in his life. When Lena walked down the aisle, Caleb holding her hand instead of her being given away like property, Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion he no longer tried to hide. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was free. Free from fear, from abuse, from the prison of low expectations. And he was free too. Free from the walls he'd built, from the belief that caring was dangerous, from the ghost of his father's violence that had haunted him for 3 decades. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them married and Ethan kissed his wife for the first time, Caleb cheered loudly enough to make the small congregation laugh. Afterward, they had dinner at a restaurant Lena had chosen. Nothing fancy, just good food and easy conversation. No speeches or toasts or formal dances. Just people who cared about each other, celebrating something real. As the evening wound down and Caleb fell asleep against Lena's shoulder, Ethan looked around the table and felt a completeness he'd never known existed. This wasn't the life he'd imagined building. It was better. 7 months later, Lena sat clad, in their bathtub, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her hand. Ethan found her there 20 seconds later, still holding the little plastic stick, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She looked up at him, her smile trembling. "Everything's right. Too right. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be taken away, for the universe to remember I don't deserve this much happiness." "Stop." He took her face in his hands, gentle but firm. "You deserve everything. Everything good, everything beautiful, everything you've ever wanted. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you believe that." She showed him the test, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "We're having a baby? We're having a baby." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough to feel her heartbeat against his chest. A baby. Their baby. A child who would grow up knowing only love and safety, who would never hear angry voices or see raised fists, who would learn that family meant protection and care, not fear. "I don't know how to be a father," Ethan admitted quietly. "My only example was terrible. What if I mess this up?" "You won't." Lena pulled back to look at him. "You've already been a father to Caleb for months now. You know how to be patient and kind and present. That's all our baby will need." "And you?" he asked. "Are you happy? Really happy?" "Terrified," she said honestly. "But yes, happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me back my life, Ethan. And now we get to create a new one together." They stayed on the bathroom floor for a long time, holding each other, talking about names and nurseries and how to tell Caleb he was going to be a big brother. Outside, the sun set over the estate, the same grounds where Ethan had once seen Lena trembling in the rain, choosing a storm over shelter because she believed that's what she deserved. How far they'd both traveled since that night. How much they'd both changed, healed, grown. Ethan thought about his empire, about the billions in his accounts and the power his name carried. All of it felt hollow compared to this. A woman he loved, a son who called him dad without obligation, and a child growing in Lena's womb who would carry their combined legacy forward. His father had taught him that strength meant dominance, that love was weakness, that caring made you vulnerable to attack. But his father had been wrong about everything that mattered. Real strength was choosing to be vulnerable anyway. Real power was using it to protect rather than control. And real wealth had nothing to do with money. It was measured in moments like this, in tears of joy and shared fears and the courage to build something new from the ashes of everything you'd survived. "I love you," Ethan said, the words coming easier now than they had in the beginning. "Both of you. All of you. My whole family. We love you too," Lena whispered. "More than you'll ever know." Outside, Caleb called for them, probably wondering where they'd gone. They helped each other up, laughing at the absurdity of spending their afternoon on the bathroom floor, and went to find their son. Their family. Their future. Their second chance at everything that mattered. And as Ethan lifted Caleb into his arms and felt Lena's hand slip into his, he understood finally what his mother had tried to teach him so many years ago, what Rose had tried to show him through simple acts of kindness. Love didn't make you weak. It made you human. And being human, flawed and vulnerable and connected, was the greatest wealth of all. The baby came on a Tuesday morning in early spring, arriving 3 weeks early with the same determination that seemed to run in the family. A girl, 7 pounds and furious at being pulled from warmth into light. They named her Rose, after the woman who'd connected their lives decades before they'd ever met. Ethan held his daughter for the first time in the hospital room, this impossibly small person who'd trusted him enough to grab his finger with her entire tiny fist, and felt something fundamental click into place. He'd thought he understood love when he married Lena, when he'd claimed Caleb as his son. But this was different. This was terrifying and perfect and absolutely transformative. "You're crying," Lena said from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "No, I'm not." But he was, tears sliding down his face without permission or shame. Caleb peered over the edge of the bed at his sister, his expression serious. "She's really small. Are you sure she's finished?" Lena laughed, the sound tired but genuine. "She's finished, baby. Just perfect the way she is. Can I hold her?" Ethan carefully transferred Rose to Caleb's waiting arms, supervising closely as the boy settled back against the pillows, cradling his sister with surprising gentleness. "Hi, Rose," Caleb whispered. "I'm your big brother. I'm going to teach you everything." Watching them, watching his family, Ethan felt the last piece of his old self fall away. The man who'd valued control above all else, who'd measured worth in dollars and power in dominance, was gone. In his place stood someone he barely recognized but was finally learning to accept. The changes started small but spread like ripples across water. 2 months after Rose's birth, Ethan called a meeting with his senior staff. Not just the executives and managers, but everyone. Housekeepers, gardeners, drivers, kitchen staff. 37 people crowded into the estate's largest sitting room, confused and nervous about being summoned together. Ethan stood before them, holding Rose against his shoulder, her small weight grounding him. Lena stood beside him, her presence a reminder of why this mattered. "I've spent years building a company," he began, focused on profits and market share and beating the competition. "And I've been successful by those measures. But I've also been blind. Blind to the people who made that success possible. Blind to struggles happening right under my roof. Blind to the fact that wealth means nothing if it doesn't lift up the people around you." He paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from suspicious to hopeful. "That changes today. I'm establishing an education fund for all employees' children. Full scholarships from kindergarten through university, including books, supplies, and living expenses. Because no child should have their potential limited by their parents' income." A murmur ran through the crowd. Maria, one of the housekeepers, raised her hand tentatively. "Sir, that's very generous, but surely there must be conditions." "No conditions. Just a commitment to education. Your children's futures matter. They matter to me because you matter to me." He outlined other changes: improved healthcare coverage, retirement contributions, paid family leave, mental health support. Programs he'd had his lawyers working on for months, funded from his personal wealth rather than company profits. "Some of you have worked here for years without me knowing your names," Ethan continued, his voice rougher now. "That was my failure, not yours. I'm not promising to be perfect going forward. But I am promising to try. To see you. To value you. To build something here that's about more than just maintaining a mansion." Caleb was the first recipient of the education fund. At 9 years old, he enrolled in one of the city's best private schools, the same one Ethan had attended decades ago under a hardship scholarship. But unlike Ethan's experience, marked by shame and awareness of being the poor kid, Caleb walked those halls with confidence. Ethan drove him to school that first morning, watching nervously as his son adjusted his new backpack. "What if they don't like me?" Caleb asked quietly. "Then they're idiots," Ethan said. "But they will like you. Because you're smart, kind and brave. Just be yourself." "That's what Mom said too. Your mother is usually right." Caleb grinned, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You love her a lot, huh?" "More than anything. Except maybe you and Rose." "Good." Caleb unbuckled his seatbelt but hesitated before getting out. "Dad, can I ask you something?" The word "dad" still caught Ethan off guard sometimes, still made his chest tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. "Anything. Do you ever think about my other dad? My real dad." Ethan chose his words carefully. "David is your biological father. That's a fact, and nothing changes it. But family isn't just about biology. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you even when it's hard. I think about David sometimes, yes. But only to be grateful that you don't have to live in that situation anymore." "I don't remember him much anymore," Caleb admitted. "Just the scary parts." "Is that bad?" "No, buddy. That's survival. Your brain is protecting you from things that hurt. Maybe someday, when you're older, you'll want to process those memories. Or maybe you won't. Either way is okay." Caleb nodded slowly, processing this. Then he leaned over and hugged Ethan quickly, fiercely. "I'm glad you're my dad now. The real one, I mean." After Caleb disappeared into the school building, Ethan sat in the car for a long moment, overwhelmed by the weight of that trust. A child who'd been let down by every man in his life had chosen to believe in him, had chosen to call him dad, to trust him with fears and questions and hopes. The responsibility of it should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like purpose, like redemption for every mistake he'd made, every person he'd overlooked, every moment he'd chosen power over connection. At home, Lena had transformed the estate's kitchen into something remarkable. Under her leadership, the staff didn't just prepare meals but created art. She'd implemented training programs, brought in guest chefs for workshops, and fostered an environment where experimentation was encouraged and failure was treated as learning. Ethan would find her there late at night sometimes, after Rose was asleep, working on new recipes or planning menus with the kind of focus he recognized from his own business dealings. She'd grown into her role with a confidence that made his heart swell with pride. One evening, he found her teaching 3 new kitchen staff the proper way to brown butter, her hands moving with practiced ease as she explained the chemistry behind the process. "You have to listen to it," she was saying. "The sound changes when it's ready. Quiet hissing to gentle bubbling. And the smell, nutty and sweet, that's your signal." She glanced up and saw him watching from the doorway. A smile crossed her face, intimate and knowing, the smile of someone who understood exactly what he was thinking. After the lesson ended and the staff had gone, she crossed to him, wiping her hands on her apron. "How long were you standing there?" she asked. "Long enough to fall in love with you all over again." She laughed, leaning into him. "You're getting soft in your old age, Mr. Cross." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally getting it right." He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of butter and vanilla that always clung to her hair. "You're incredible at this. You know that, right? I'm learning. Still making mistakes, still figuring things out. But yes, I love it. I love having purpose beyond just surviving, beyond just being someone's maid or someone's victim. I'm actually building something." "We're building something," Ethan corrected. "Together." "Together," she agreed, reaching up to kiss him softly. Rose's cry echoed through the baby monitor on the counter, breaking the moment. They pulled apart with synchronized sighs, the reality of parenthood trumping romance. "Your turn," Lena said. "I got her last time. And I've been on my feet for 12 hours. Your turn." Ethan kissed her forehead and headed for the nursery, listening to her laughter follow him down the hallway. This was his life now. Negotiations over diaper changes, sleepless nights, small moments of connection stolen between responsibilities. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. 18 years passed in what felt like both a lifetime and a moment. Ethan stood in the auditorium of the state's most prestigious medical school, his hair slicked back, his face marked by lines that came from smiling rather than frowning. Beside him, Lena gripped his hand tightly, her own face radiant despite the tears already gathering in her eyes. On stage, among a sea of graduates in caps and gowns, sat Caleb. Dr. Caleb Morrison Cross, as the program listed him. 27 years old, top of his class, already accepted into a competitive residency program in pediatrics. The boy who'd once cried from hunger in a crumbling tenement was now a man who would spend his life healing children. "I can't believe this is happening," Lena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "When I look at him up there, I still see that scared little boy. And then I remember everything he's overcome, everything we've all overcome, and it feels impossible." "It's not impossible," Ethan said softly. "It's what happens when someone gets the chance they deserve." Rose, now 17 and preparing for her own college applications, sat on Ethan's other side, rolling her eyes with a particular exasperation only a teenager could muster. "Mom's going to cry through the whole ceremony, isn't she?" "Absolutely," Lena confirmed without shame. "And if you're not crying at your brother's medical school graduation, you have no heart." "I have a heart. I just express emotions internally." "You're your father's daughter," Lena said, but her smile was fond. The dean stepped to the podium, beginning the ceremony with the traditional remarks about achievement and future promise. Ethan had sat through countless speeches in his life, most of them forgettable. But today, every word felt weighted with meaning. These graduates had worked for years to reach this moment. Caleb had worked harder than most, balancing rigorous academics with 2 part-time jobs he'd insisted on taking despite having no financial need. "I want to earn it," he'd told Ethan. "Not just have it given to me." That determination, that integrity, hadn't come from Ethan's teaching. It had come from watching Lena work herself to exhaustion for years, from understanding the value of effort because he'd seen what happened when it was absent. When the valedictorian was announced, Ethan felt Lena's hand tighten in his. "Please welcome Dr. Caleb Morrison Cross." The applause was thunderous. Caleb stood and made his way to the podium, looking confident in a way that still sometimes surprised Ethan. This was the child who'd once been too afraid to speak above a whisper, who'd flinched at raised voices, who'd apologized for taking up space. Now he stood before hundreds of people, commanding attention without demanding it. "Thank you," Caleb began, his voice steady and clear. "When I was 9 years old, I didn't know what a doctor was. I'd never been to a hospital except for emergencies. I'd never imagined a future beyond surviving each day. My world was small and scared and defined by what I couldn't have rather than what I could become." He paused, his eyes finding Ethan and Lena in the crowd. "Then someone saw me. Not the poverty or the fear or the circumstances I couldn't control. He saw potential. He saw worth. And he gave me something more valuable than money, though that helped too. He gave me the belief that I could be more than my beginning." Ethan felt his throat tighten. Beside him, Lena was openly crying now, not even trying to hide it. "My mom taught me about strength," Caleb continued. "She showed me what it meant to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. She taught me that love sometimes means making the hardest choices for the right reasons. And my dad, the one who chose me rather than being stuck with me by biology, he taught me that family is built through actions, not accidents. That showing up matters more than sharing DNA. That privilege comes with responsibility to lift others up." He looked back at his classmates. "We're all standing here because someone invested in us. Teachers, parents, mentors, friends. People who believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. As we leave here today as doctors, I challenge us all to remember that. To see the people others overlook. To invest in potential that hasn't been given a chance. To understand that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about giving people hope." The applause when he finished was deafening. Ethan stood, clapping until his hands hurt, watching his son accept his diploma and knowing that this moment represented something far beyond academic achievement. This was a generational transformation. This was breaking cycles. This was proof that one person's choice to care could ripple forward in ways impossible to measure. After the ceremony, they gathered in the courtyard for pictures. Caleb posed with his classmates, then pulled his family close for photos that would hang on walls for decades. "I'm so proud of you," Lena said, holding her son's face in her hands the way she used to when he was small. "So incredibly proud. I couldn't have done it without you. Either of you." Caleb looked at Ethan. "Dad, I know I thanked you in the speech, but I need to say it again, just to you. You saved my life. Not metaphorically. Literally. If you hadn't shown up that night, if you hadn't cared enough to look past what I was to see what I could be, I'd be dead or in prison or continuing the same cycle that destroyed my biological father. Everything I am, everything I'll do, it starts with you choosing to see me." Ethan pulled him into a hug, this man who'd once been a terrified child, and felt the weight of 18 years of love and struggle and triumph settle over him like a blessing. "You did the work, son. I just opened the door. You're the one who walked through it and kept walking even when it got hard." "We all did the work," Caleb said. "That's what family means, right? We lift each other up." Rose, who'd been maintaining her teenage cool until now, crashed into the hug, followed by Lena, until they were all tangled together, laughing and crying and holding each other in the middle of a crowded courtyard while other families navigated around them. "Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it."